In the late 1970s, a vicious killer was stalking the young women of the Santa Barbara suburb, Isla Vista, and the surrounding communities. His MO was to pick up young female hitchhikers, then take them somewhere remote to abuse, then execute them with a gunshot to the head. 4 young women would fall prey to the killer, their bodies found dumped on quiet roads. Eventually, the killer met his end in prison at the hands of the other inmates. Thor Christiansen, the Isla Vista executioner. Thor Christiansen was born on December 28, 1957, in Denmark. He moved to the U.S. with his family when he was 5 years old. They settled into a Danish community in Solvang, California, where Thor's father ran a restaurant. The nearby city of Isla Vista is a college town closely associated with UC Santa Barbara, filled with students. Growing up, Thor exhibited signs of what was to come. Childhood friends said that he would kill animals starting in 6th grade. In some cases, he would step on them, but he also caught birds and frogs with a butterfly net and blew them up with firecrackers. At home, Thor was treated harshly by his alcoholic father when the two were together. Around the same time he started killing animals, he began drinking. In middle school, Thor began to let his studies slide, and his previously good grades plummeted before he eventually dropped out. Friends reported that he had trouble with girls, which spurred resentment in Thor. His parents did not spend a lot of time with their son and gave him money instead. By age 16, he was drinking regularly and driving an Audi paid for by his parents. He moved out of his parents' house and started working at a local gas station. As time passed, Thor became more withdrawn and said things that spooked his acquaintances. One childhood friend said that he seemed to be mad at the world, and his growing fixation on killing, along with his frustration at his own situation, led to weight gain and depression. When he was still a teenager, the murders began. When he was 19, he committed his first murder on November 20th, 1976. He picked up 21-year-old Jacqueline Ann Rook from a bus stop. She had been hitchhiking when she disappeared. 2 weeks after Rook disappeared, a 19-year-old waitress named Mary Ann Saris was taken. She had been known to hitchhike and was last seen outside a hospital after an appointment at 4:30 p.m. With 2 disappearances in a short span of time, the community began to fear that a maniac was on the loose. On January 18th, a third young woman disappeared. Patricia Laney was a 21-year-old student. She had been active in the searches for the first 2 victims, and she vanished from the same intersection where Saris was last seen. Her nude body was found 1 day later, dumped on the side of a secluded road that led to one of Ronald Reagan's properties. She had been shot in the head, and near her body, police also found bloody paper towels that had fingerprints on them that had likely been used to clean up the killer's car. Unfortunately, there was not a match for the fingerprints, as the killer did not have a criminal record. But police pushed the investigation forward, and 2 days later, on January 19th, Jacqueline Rook's body was found up the same road where Patricia Laney's body was found. She had been shot twice, and her clothing had been removed after her death. Police suspected that the killer was someone who was familiar with the area, as the road that the women were found on was not well traveled. It was a back road used by residents to drive to Solvang, but this did not yet lead to the killer's discovery. A month after the grisly discoveries, Thor and a friend were drinking and smoking marijuana in his car, looking out over the ocean. A policeman saw them and stopped. He confiscated their alcohol and wrote the boys a ticket. When the officer went to check the trunk of the car, Thor tried to refuse, but the officer insisted, and inside the trunk he found a .22 caliber pistol, which he also confiscated. Despite the alcohol, drugs, and pistol, the 2 young men were not arrested. After this close call, Thor left the area and moved to Oregon. While he was away, his second victim's body was found. Mary Ann Saris had been dumped on a quiet road outside of Los Alamos, California. He did not stay in Oregon for long, and when he returned, he had lost a considerable amount of weight. The creature also began making regular trips to Los Angeles. One can only imagine what he did on these trips, but it was a much larger city with the anonymity of scale where disappearances would be less noticeable. Friends remarked that Thor had also become obsessed with keeping his car clean, paying particular attention to the trunk. Thor Christiansen killed his fourth known victim on May 26, 1979. 23-year-old Laura Sue Benjamin was working as a prostitute in Los Angeles. The killer picked her up, and the two drove off into the San Gabriel Mountains. Once he was out of sight, Thor pulled a gun on Benjamin and shot her to death. Her body was found a month later, dumped in a culvert. On April 18, 1979, Thor picked up 21-year-old Lydia Preston. They had made a deal to exchange adult services for $45. Lydia began to worry as her John drove past several hotels and then into the Hollywood Hills. Once they were out of the city, Thor shot her in the head. However, Preston survived and grabbed the steering wheel. The car spun out of control and crashed. Preston jumped out and ran to a nearby house. She survived with scars, a deaf ear, and shattered skull. Luckily, the bullet did not cause brain damage, and the young woman's escape would mark the beginning of the end for the hitchhiker slayer. 3 months later, on June 11, 1979, Lydia Preston was sitting at the Bottom Line Bar in Hollywood when she crossed paths once again with the killer. When she saw him walk in, she ran to the back and used the phone to call police. They showed up and arrested Thor Christiansen. As they investigated the 22-year-old, authorities saw distinct similarities between the attack on Preston and the murders that they had been working to solve. They also saw the record of the .22 caliber pistol that had been confiscated from Thor and were able to match his prints to those found on the paper towel that had been near the body of Patricia Laney. When Christiansen was confronted with the evidence that police had compiled, he confessed to the 4 murders on July 27th. It is possible that he withheld other murders that he believed the police were unaware of, as he had followed his cases in the press. He tried to convince investigators that the killings were justified because the victims had made fun of his weight. Initially, Thor pled guilty due to reasons of insanity, but a court-appointed psychiatrist disagreed. In early 1980, he went to trial for the killing of Laura Sue Benjamin, and in June he pled guilty to the first 3 murders. For his crimes, Thor Christiansen was sentenced to life in prison. But the killing did not end there. His defense team had told the court that he would be in danger when he arrived in prison. They knew that the young blonde-haired man would be the target of other inmates due to his crimes against women, and they were right. 6 months after he arrived at Folsom Prison, on March 30th, 1981, Thor was stabbed to death, and his killer has never been identified.